Some folks just don't have the sense God gave a goose, muttered Frank Murphy, adjusting his worn Veterans Day cap as he stood on the edge of Beale Street. He shook his head at the crowd streaming by, tourists, locals, all too busy to notice. The dying German Shepherd slumped against the brick wall. 78 years on this earth, and Frank had never seen heart so cold. The dog's ribs pressed through his matted fur. His eyes, dim but still proud, blinked slowly in the fading sunlight. Dr. Samuel Hayes, crouched beside him, examined the frail frame with hands long accustomed to both wounds and war. 3 hours, maybe less, he said quietly to Frank. Hypothermia is already setting in. The sun cast long shadows between Memphis buildings. Cameras clicked. Coffee cups sloshed. But no one stopped. No one cared until someone did. A tiny blur of motion. 2-year-old Caleb Thompson slipped free from his mother's hand and halted before the suffering dog. His blue eyes locked with the shepherd's, and something passed between them. Grace Thompson, 29, clutched her purse tighter and glanced around in panic. She was tall, pale, with tired eyes and a gold star pin on her coat. She'd spent the last 3 years breathing like she was afraid to take up space. Her fingers tightened instinctively around her wedding ring. "Mommy, where Daddy?" Caleb had asked that question at least 100 times, and every time it pierced her like shrapnel. Tommy had died in Afghanistan, age 26, hero's death. Purple Heart, but none of that meant anything to a 2-year-old, who would never know his father's laugh. Grace spotted her son kneeling beside the broken dog. Her chest tightened with fear. She rushed forward, but stopped cold. The dog didn't move, didn't growl. It just looked up, weak but dignified, as if still waiting for a command from a long-gone handler. There was something military in the animal's posture, something familiar. 3 years earlier, the Afghan sun burned over forward operating base Chapman. Sergeant, 85 pounds of muscle, discipline, and loyalty, moved with precision across the compound. His coat gleamed, his eyes sharp. He was the 47th Infantry's pride. "That dog's got more heart than most soldiers," said Corporal David Martinez, adjusting his vest. "And twice the brains of some officers I've met," the recruits laughed. But it wasn't a joke. Sergeant had saved 17 lives in 8 months. His gift? Sensing IEDs long before the rest of the unit even felt danger. His alert signal, a specific sit and stare, meant one thing: death nearby. That morning, they were clearing a route for a convoy. One of the Humvees carried a young Private Tommy Thompson, just 23, married to Grace back home. Baby on the way. He carried her photo in his vest, talked about her every day. They'd been on the road for 2 kilometers when Sergeant froze. The sit. The stare. David's stomach turned. IED, IED, everyone hold. He barked over the radio. The convoy stopped. Then, gunfire cracked from the ridge. An ambush. Trapped between a minefield and Taliban fire, the convoy was sitting in a kill zone. No way back. No way forward. "We need to move the vehicles," came the shout from command. But David had already calculated the nightmare. The explosives were perfectly placed to trap them. Backtrack and they'd walk into a second ambush. Stay. And they'd get shelled to pieces. There was only one way out. Someone had to cross the kill zone and neutralize the IED manually. A suicide mission. "I'll do it," came Tommy's voice over the radio. "I'm single. No kids yet." "Negative," David snapped. "You've got a family waiting." The debate ended with the first mortar shell. The sky split open, and David made the call. The one that still haunted his sleep. Now in Memphis, Grace looked into the eyes of the German Shepherd and saw a soldier. Sergeant. The name stitched on Tommy's old vest. The one she kept in a box under the bed. It couldn't be, but somehow It was Thompson. "You and your squad provide covering fire. I'm taking Sergeant across to clear the device." What he couldn't say was that Sergeant had detected something else. The dog's behavior indicated multiple explosive devices in a pattern designato channel movement toward a kill zone. Someone had to map the safe path through the minefield, and only Sergeant could do it. They moved like ghosts across the broken ground, David following Sergeant's precise navigation through the deadly maze. The dog's nose guided them around 3 additional IEDs buried in the approach route, his training and instincts functioning flawlessly under fire. But as they reached the primary device, everything went wrong at once. A rocket-propelled grenade struck Tommy Thompson's Humvee, the explosion sending shrapnel screaming across the road. David turned at the sound and saw Tommy crawling from the wreckage, blood streaming down his face, desperately trying to reach the radio to call for medical evacuation. The RPG had been aimed at David and Sergeant in that split second of clarity. That comes in combat. David understood the tactical picture completely. The Taliban had identified him as the primary threat, the handler who could navigate their minefield and escape their trap. Killing him would trap the entire convoy. Tommy Thompson had drawn fire by exposing himself, buying David the precious seconds needed to disarm the primary IED. David's hands flew over the device, his training taking over while bullets winded overhead. Sergeant Lele pressed against his side, providing emotional anchor, while his handler worked with explosives that could vaporize them both. The dog's calm presence steadied David's nerves, allowed him to focus on the delicate work of defeating Taliban bomb-making. 2 minutes later, the road was clear, but Tommy Thompson was dying. David and Sergeant crossed the kill zone again, this time carrying a broken soldier who weighed barely nothing in David's adrenaline-fueled arms. Tommy's blood soaked through David's uniform. As they reached the medical evacuation point where a helicopter waited to ferry the wounded to the field hospital. "Tell Grace," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotors. "Tell her Caleb needs a father figure, someone good, someone who will love them both." Those were Tommy Thompson's last words. David Martinez. That promise for 3 years through 2 more deployments and a medical retirement that brought him back to the United States with Sergeant and a head full of nightmares. He tried to contact Grace Thompson dozens of times, but grief had made her unreachable. Phone numbers disconnected, addresses changed. Military wives support networks that led nowhere. But he'd trained Sergeant to recognize Grace's scent from Tommy's photographs. He taught the dog to identify military insignia, to respond to Gold Star family pins, to search crowds for the woman Tommy had loved more than life itself. The mission wasn't over. It would never be over until David kept his promise to a dying friend and gave Caleb Thompson father figure his real father had died trying to provide. Caleb's tiny hand stretched toward Sergeant's matted head with the fearless determination that only toddlers possess. Grace felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched her son approach the massive German shepherd. Every maternal instinct screaming at her to snatch him away from potential danger. "Ma'am, you need to get your boy back," a woman in designer jeans called out, her voice sharp with alarm. "That animal looks half dead, could be rabid." Frank Murphy stepped closer to the unfolding scene, his weathered face creased with something between concern and curiosity. "That dog's been waiting for somebody," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of 7 decades. "Been sitting in that exact spot for 3 days now. Won't take food from nobody, won't move for traffic, just waiting." Grace's breath caught in her throat. 3 days. The same amount of time she'd been feeling inexplicably drawn to take Coletto. This exact part of B Street, despite having no real reason to be here. She told herself it was about exposing him to Veterans Day ceremonies, about honoring his father's memory. But something deeper had been pulling her toward this moment. Dr. Samuel Hayes emerged from the small crowd that gathered, his medical bag in hand, and the careful movements of someone who'd spent 50 years treating everything from battlefield wounds to family pets. At 72, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd served his country in Vietnam and his community in Memphis ever since. "Young lady," Dr. Hayes said gently, his voice carrying the soft authority of someone accustomed to being trusted. "In crisis moments, that boy of yours has good instincts. This dog isn't aggressive. He's grieving? Grieving?" Grace's voice cracked slightly. The word hit too close to home, stirring emotions she'd spent 3 years learning to suppress. Dr. Hayes knelt beside Sargent, his experienced hands moving carefully over the dog's body, checking for injuries while assessing his overall condition. "See how he's positioned, still maintaining military bearing despite his state. This isn't a stray, ma'am. This is a soldier." The crowd pressed closer, smartphones emerging like digital vultures, eager to capture whatever drama was unfolding. Grace instinctively moved to shield Caleb from the cameras, her protective instincts flaring at the sight of strangers documenting her family's private moment. "Y'all need to put them phones away." Frank Murphy's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a rusty blade. "Show some respect." But the social media generation had already scented something viral in the making. A young woman with perfectly styled hair held her phone at arm's length, her voice artificially bright as she narrated to her followers. "Oh my God, guys, there's literally a dying dog on B Street, and this mom is just letting her baby touch it. This is either super heartwarming or super irresponsible. I can't decide." Grace felt heat flush her cheeks as the familiar weight of public judgment settled on her shoulders. As a single mother, she'd grown accustomed to strangers questioning her every decision. Why she worked 2 jobs, why she didn't date, why she lived in a tin apartment instead of moving back with family. Now they were questioning her maternal instincts, in real time, broadcasting her choices to the world. Caleb remained oblivious to the adulation swirling around him. His small fingers made contact with Sargent's head, and the dog's reaction was immediate and profound. The German shepherd's ears, which had been flattened against his skull in resignation, slowly lifted, his tail motionless for days, gave the faint test twitch. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Hayes whispered, his voice thick with amazement. "He's responding." Sargent slowly lifted his massive head, his intelligent brown eyes focusing on Caleb's face with an intensity that made the surrounding crowd fall silent. For a moment that stretched like eternity, dog and child studied each other with the solemn gravity of old souls recognizing cured spirits. Then Sargent's nose began working, his nostrils flaring. Ash caught a scent that sent shockwaves through his trained senses. His entire body went rigid with recognition, every muscle tensing as instincts honed by 3 years of searching suddenly screamed that his mission was finally complete. Grace watched in fascination as the dog's demeanor changed completely. His eyes moved from Caleb to her jacket, fixating on the small gold star pin that marked her as a military widow. His breathing quickened, not from distress, but from excitement. Barely contained by his military discipline. "What's he doing?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hayes was studying Sargent's behavior with the practiced eye of someone who'd worked with military working dogs during his service. Years. He's recognizing something or someone. The implications of that statement sent chills down Grace's spine. She knelt beside Caleb, bringing herself to Sargent's eye level, and saw something in the dog's gaze that defied rational explanation. Intelligence. Yes, but also something that looked disturbingly like relief, like a soldier finally receiving orders to come home. "Mommy doggy knows daddy." Caleb announced with the matter-of-fact certainty that children possess about things adults struggle to understand. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Tommy had never mentioned knowing any German shepherds. Had never talked about military working dogs in his letters home. But there was something in Sergeant's reaction to her gold star pin, something in the way he was looking at Caleb that suggested connections beyond coincidence. "Ma'am," a businessman in an expensive suit called out, his voice tight with impotence. "You're creating a public disturbance. Some of us have places to then go," Frank Murphy replied flatly. "Nobody's stopping you from walking around." But the crowd wasn't dispersing. If anything, more people were gathering, drawn by the unusual sight of a small child and a large dog greeting, some kind of emotional connection in the middle of Memphis's busiest tourist district. The energy was shifting from mere curiosity to something deeper, as if the assembled strangers were witnessing something significant they couldn't quite define. Grace felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, the same overwhelming sensation that struck whenever she became the center of unwanted attention. She'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible, to navigate life's challenges without drawing notice or judgment. Now dozens of strangers were watching her every move, waiting to see what she would do next. Dr. Hayes seemed to sense her distress. "There's something you need to know about this dog," Hess said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "He's not random. Dogs like this don't end up on street corners by accident." Sergeant's tail was wagging now, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke of profound happiness, barely contained by exhaustion and physical deterioration. His eyes never left Grace's face, as if he was memorizing every detail to compare against some internal reference he'd been carrying for years. The crowd's murmur grew louder as more people noticed the dog's transformation. Cameras continued clicking and recording, but Grace found herself caring less about the digital audience and more about the flesh and blood drama unfolding at her feet. Caleb had settled cross-legged on the sidewalk, his small hands now stroking Sergeant's ears with the gentle confidence of a child who'd never learned to fear large animals. "Good doggy," he whispered, his voice carrying the same protective tenderness Grace used when comforting him after nightmares. And in that moment, watching her son's natural compassion override every adult fear and prejudice surrounding them, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She reached out and placed her own hand on Sergeant's head, feeling the warmth off living flesh beneath matted fur. The solid reality of bone and muscle that spoke of strength not yet surrendered to circumstance. Sergeant's eyes closed at her touch, and a sound escaped his throat, part whimper, part sigh, that spoke of a burden finally shared. Dr. Hayes's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he examined Sergeant more thoroughly, his fingers probing gently beneath the matted fur along the dog's neck. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the elderly veterinarian worked, his expression growing more serious with each discovery. "Hold on now," Dr. Hayes murmured, his fingers detecting something hard beneath the skin at the base of Sergeant's neck. "This fella's got himself a military identition chip." Grace felt her blood turn cold. Military working dogs carried embedded chips with their service records, unit information, and handler details. If Sergeant was active in military, there would be protocols, procedures, people looking for him. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Frank Murphy leaned closer, his old eyes sharp with sudden interest. "You can read them chips?" "Not here, but my clinic's got the scanner." Dr. Hayes looked up at Grace, his expression gentle but urgent. "Ma'am, if this dog's what I think, Hayes, there's a whole lot more to this story than a stray animal needing help." The crowd's energy shifted palpably as word spread through the gathered strangers. Military dog, service animal, hero. The smartphones came out again, but this time with reverence rather than voyeuristic curiosity. Even the businessman in the expensive suit had stopped his impatient pacing to listen. "Can you scan him here?" Grace asked, her voice barely steady. Something deep in her gut was screaming that she needed to know the truth, even if it shattered the fragile peace she'd built around her grief. Dr. Hayes nodded toward his veterinary van parked on a side street. "Got a portable scanner in the truck. Take 2 minutes." As they helped Sargent to his feet, Grace was struck by the dog's obvious effort to maintain dignity despite his weakened condition. He moved with the careful precision of a soldier on parade, each step deliberate and controlled. Caleb walked beside him, one tiny hand resting on Sargent's shoulder like a living anchor. The portable scanner beeped to life in Dr. Haz's weathered hands, its small screen glowing as he positioned it over the chip embedded beneath Sargent's skin. Numbers and letters cascaded across the display, military codes that meant nothing to most civilians, but everything to those who understood the language of war. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Dr. Hayes whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is Sergeant K-9 Unit, 47th Infantry Division." Grace's world tilted sideways. The 47th Infantry, Tommy's unit, the same soldiers who'd been with her husband when he died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The coincidence was too massive, too impossible to be random chance. That's my husband's unit," she managed to say, her voice cracking like thin ice. Frank Murphy removed his Veterans Day cap, his grizzled head bowing slightly in automatic respect. All bayhorns waggled. "That there's a war hero, folks." The crowd's reaction was immediate and profound. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Even the young woman who'd been live streaming the encounter fell silent, suddenly understanding that she was witnessing something sacred rather than merely viral. Dr. Hayes continued reading from the scanner, his voice growing more amazed with each detail. "Says here he's credited with 17 lives saved. Bronze Star Medal, Purple Heart. Handler was." He paused, squinting at the small screen. "Corporal David Martinez." Grace's knees nearly buckled. David Martinez. She knew that name. Tommy had mentioned him in letters talked about the dog handler who'd saved their entire convoy multiple times. The man who'd tried to reach her after Tommy's death, whose phone calls she'd been too devastated to return. "David Martinez tried to contact me," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "After Tommy died, I couldn't talk to anyone from doing it. It hurt too much." Sargent's reaction to hearing his handler's name was electric. His tail began wagging furiously, his eyes brightening with hope and recognition. He looked around the crowd as if expecting David to materialize from among the gathered edifices. Dr. Hayes was still reading from the scanner, his expression growing more somber. "According to this, Sargent's been listed as missing for 3 years. Last known location." He paused, checking the coordinates. Afghanistan. "There's a note here about him being separated during a combat incident that resulted in casualties. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Sargent had somehow made his way back to the United States and spent 3 years searching for something or someone connected to that final mission. The mission that killed Tommy Thompson and changed Grace's life forever." "Ma'am," Frank Murphy said gently, "this dog didn't end up on Bile Street by accident. Military working dogs like this, they don't just wander. They got purpose." Grace looked down at Caleb, who was still stroking Sargent's ears with unconscious tenderness. Her son had never shown fear of large animals, had always been drawn to dogs in a way that surprised her. Now she wondered if that attraction was something deeper than childhood curiosity. "How did you get here, boy?" she whispered to Sargent, kneeling to meet his intelligent eyes. "What are you looking for?" As if in answer to her question, Sargent began moving with sudden purpose. Despite his weakened condition, he walked with determination toward a small alcove beside the building where he'd been waiting. The crowd followed, sensing that whatever is about to be revealed would explain the mysterious presence of a war hero. On a Memphis street corner dot in the shadows of the alcove, partially hidden beneath a pile of debris that looked like random urban litter, Sergeant nosed at something with deliberate intent. Dr. Hayes helped clear away the covering, revealing a weathered military pack that had been carefully concealed, but protected from the elements. "Well, I'll be damned," Frank Murphy breathed. "He's been guarding something." Dr. Hayes lifted the pack with reverent care, noting the way Sergeant watched every movement with intense focus. Fatpack bore military markings and a name tape that made Grace's heart stop. "Martinez D. This belonged to his handler," Dr. Hayes said quietly. "Sergeant's been protecting it." With trembling fingers, Grace unzipped the pack under Sergeant's watchful gaze. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, were items that told a story of love, loss, and promises that transcendeth. A Purple Heart medal, military photographs showing David Martinez and Sergeant in their prime, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with her name written in careful handwriting. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something profound. Even the skeptics who'd questioned Grace's judgment earlier were now silent with respect, understanding that they were present for a moment that would reshape lives. Grace's hand shook as she held the envelope. Her name was written in David Martinez's handwriting. She recognized it from the sympathy cards he'd sent after Tommy's death, cards she'd been too broken to acknowledge at the time. "This is for you, isn't it?" she whispered to Sergeant. The dog's tail wagged once, a single deliberate acknowledgement that seemed to say, "Mission accomplished." Dr. Hayes checked his watch, his expression growing concerned. "Ma'am, this dog's still in medical distress. Whatever's in that letter, he's been waiting 3 years to deliver it, but he won't last much longer without proper care." Grace looked around at the faces surrounding her. Frank Murphy's weathered compassion, Dr. Hayes's professional concern, Caleb's innocentrist, and the mixed expressions of strangers who'd been transformed from casual observers into invested participants in an unfolding miracle. She thought about Tommy's final letters filled with stories about the men who served beside him, especially the dog handler who'd saved their convoy repeatedly. She thought about David Martinez's unanswered phone calls, his attempts to honor whatever promise he'd made to her dying husband. And she thought about Sergeant, a war hero who'd somehow navigated 3 years and thousands of miles to complete a mission no one had ordered him to undertake. "We're taking him home," she announced, her voice stronger than it had been in 3 years. "All of us. Whatever this letter says, whatever David Martinez wanted me to know, Sergeant's delivered his message. Now it's time for him to rest." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Strangers, united by witnessing something that restored their faith in purpose and connection. Frank Murphy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand while Dr. Hayes nodded approval. But Grace knew the real test was yet to come. Felidar in her hands held secrets that would either heal the wounds of the past 3 years or tear open scars she'd spent so long learning to live with. Sergeant looked up at her with eyes that held intelligence, hope, and the patient wisdom of a soldier who'd finally completed his longest mission. The ride to Dr. Hayes' clinic passed in tense silence, broken only by Caleb's soft humming as he sat beside Sergeant in the back of the veterinary van. Grace clutched David Martinez's letter. In her hands, the envelope growing damp from her nervous perspiration. Every few seconds, she glanced at the dashboard clock, watching precious minutes tick away. While Sergeant's breathing grew more labored, Dr. Hayes navigated Memphis traffic with the urgency of someone who'd spent decades racing against time to save lives. His core temperature's dropping, he called back to Grace. "Whatever's in that letter, you might want to read it now. Dogs liketh this, they hold on until their mission's complete." But once they let go, Grace's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope, the paper crinkling in the humid Tennessee air. David Martinez Chandrinked was precise. Military trained, but she could see places where his pen had hesitated, where emotion had interrupted discipline. Dear Grace, if you're reading this, then Sergeant found you, and I'm probably dead. I know you didn't return my calls after Tommy's funeral, and I understand why. Sometimes the living are too painful a reminder of the dead. Grace felt tears sting her eyes as the first lines transported her back 3 years to those horrible weeks after the chaplain's visit. She'd received dozens of condolence letters from Tommy's unit, but she'd been too shattered to read most of them, too angry at God and Thermi and the whole world to process the sympathy of strangers. Tommy saved my life on March 15, 2021. Not just my life, 12 other soldiers were in that convoy. He drew enemy fire away from Sergeant and me while we cleared an IED field. He died so we could live. But before he died, he made me promise something that's haunted me every day since. He said, "Tell Grace that Caleb needs a father figure, someone good, someone who will love them both." Those were his last words. Grace, not about the mission, not about Theor, about making sure his family would be okay. Grace's breath caught in her throat. In the front seat, Dr. Hayes glanced in the rear view mirror, his expression gentle with understanding. Beside her, Caleb continued stroking Sergeant's head, unaware that the letter in his mother's hands was reshaping their entire understanding of the past 3 years. The flashback hit Grace like a physical blow, dragging her back to that March evening when she'd been 7 months pregnant, folding Tommy's letter while waiting for his weekly video call. He'd been excited that night, talking about coming home, about teaching Caleb to throw a baseball, about the house they'd buy with his deployment savings. "There's this dog handler in my unit," Tommy had said during their last conversation, his pixelated image frozen on her laptop screen. "Martinez, good guy. Saved our bacon more times than I can count. If anything happens to me, Grace, promise me you'll let people help. Don't try to do everything alone." She'd laughed at him then, told him nothing was going to happen, that he needed to stop being so dramatic. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Grace returned to the letter, her vision blurring as Afghanistan memories collided with present reality. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 years because I made Tommy a promise, but also because he've been carrying guilt that's eating me alive. The mission where Tommy died, it should have been me. I was the one who volunteered to cross that kill zone, but Tommy insisted on providing cover fire. He put himself in the line of fire to protect Sergeant and me. I've trained Sergeant to find you. It took 2 years to teach him to recognize your scent from Tommy's photographs, to identify military family pins, to search crowds for the woman who haunts my dreams. Not because I'm in love with you, though Tommy talked about you so much. I feel like I know you, but because I owe your husband a debt I can never repay." The van pulled into Dr. Hayes' clinic parking lot. But Grace was lost in the past, remembering details she'd suppressed for years. Tommy had mentioned David Martinez in several letters, always with respect and affection. The dog handler who'd saved their convoy, the soldier who taught Tommy to play poker, the man who'd shared pictures of his own dog back home in Colorado. Sergeant isn't just a military working dog, Grace. He's the closest thing I have to family. My parents died when I was 18. No siblings, no wife, no children. Sergeant and I have been partners for 4 years, and he's the only thing that keeps the nightmares away, but he's been different since Tommy died. Depressed, refusing to work with other handlers. The Army was going to retire him early, maybe put him down if they couldn't place him. That's when I knew what I had to do. Dr. Hayes had stopped the van, but had no move to get out. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them. The dying dog, the grief-stricken mother, the innocent child who'd somehow become a catalyst for a reunion 3 years in the making. Grace's hand shook as he continued reading David's words, painting a picture of sacrifice and dedication that overwhelmed her. I signed my commission and brought Sergeant home with me. Spent my savings training him for a different kind of mission. Not detecting bombs, but finding you. Teaching him to be patient, to wait, to recognize when he'd found Tommy's family. We've been traveling for 8 months, following leads, checking military bases where Tommy mentioned you might have connections. Sergeant led us to Memphis because this is where Tommy said he wanted to retire. B Street specifically. He said you'd fallen in love with the music scene here during your honeymoon. The memory hit Grace like lightning. Their honeymoon. 5 days in Memphis, staying at a bed and breakfast near Beale Street, listening to blues music and talking about the future. Tommy had joked about buying a house here someday, raising their children with music and history all around them. She'd moved to Memphis 6 months after Tommy's death, drawn by memories she couldn't explain, settling in a tiny apartment 3 blocks from where Sergeant had been waiting. If you're reading this letter, it means I didn't make it to this moment. Maybe my heart finally gave out. Too much guilt, too many nightmares, too many promises I couldn't keep. But Sergeant made it. Have found you and Caleb, and that means Tommy's mission is complete. Sergeant knows about children. He's gentle, protective, loyal to a fault. He'll be defending Caleb if necessary, but more importantly, he'll live loving him. That's what Tommy wanted. Not just protection for his son, but unconditional love. Dr. Hayes finally spoke, his voice gentle but urgent. Grace, we need to get him inside. His breathing's getting shallow. Grace looked up from the letter to see Sergeant's eyes fixed on her face, his gaze holding intelligence and hope, and something that looked remarkably like peace. Caleb was still stroking the dog's ears, his small voice whispering creationists that seemed to be keeping Sergeant conscious through sheer force of innocent will. The final paragraphs of David's letter blurred through her tears. I don't expect forgiveness for surviving when Tommy didn't. I don't expect you to welcome a stranger's dog into your life. But I hope you'll understand that Sergeant isn't a stranger. He's family. He's the brother Tommy never had. The Uncle Caleb deserves the guardian angel who's been looking for you across half the country. Tommy saved my life so I could save his family. Now it's Sergeant's turn to complete the mission. Take care of each other. Love each other. Honor Tommy's memory by building the family he died protecting. With respect and undying gratitude, Corporal David Martinez, U.S. Sun Army, retired. P.S. Sergeant's favorite command is home. When you're ready, just say the word. Grace folded the letter with trembling hands, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. 3 years of anger, loneliness, and survivor's guilt crashed against their revelation that Tommy's love had reached across death to provide exactly what she and Caleb needed most. Dr. Hayes was watching her in the rearview mirror, his expression patient but concerned. We need to move, Grace. That dog's been holding on by pure willpower, but he needs medical attention now. Grace looked at Sergeant, then at Caleb, then at the letter that had rewritten their entire story. Tommy hadn't just died. He'd orchestrated their salvation from beyond the grave, using a dog's loyalty and a stranger's guilt to heal wounds she hadn't even known were still bleeding. Home, she whispered to Sergeant, testing the word David Martinez had taught him. Sergeant's tail wagged once, weakly but deliberately, and his eyes closed with something that looked remarkably like relief. Dr. Hayes' clinic erupted into controlled chaos as they rushed Sergeant through the front doors. The elderly veterinarians, hands moved with the precision of someone who'd spent 50 years fighting death, but Grace could see the concern etched deep in the lines around his eyes. Sergeant's breathing had become dangerously shallow during the short walk from the van to the examination table. His core temperatures dropped to 94. Dr. Hayes announced to his assistant, a young woman named Sarah, who appeared the moment they'd burst through the door. "Get the heating pads and start an Eve line. We're looking at severe hypothermia and dehydration." Grace clutched Caleb against her chest, watching in helpless terror as the medical team worked to stabilize the dog who'd traveled thousands of miles to find them. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just when she discovered the truth about Sergeant's mission, just when she'd understood the depth of love that had brought him to their doorstep, she might lose him to the very suffering that love had endured. Clinic's front door chimed as Frank Murphy entered, his weathered face creased with worry. Behind him came an unexpected crowd, the businessman in the expensive suit, the young woman who'd been live streaming, Dr. Hayes' neighbors who'd heard about the situation through the small-town network that still existed in Memphis despite its urban growth. "How's our boy doing?" Frank asked quietly, removing his Veterans Day cap in the presence of medical emergency. "Touch and go," Dr. Hayes replied without looking up from his patient. 3 years of malnutrition and stress have taken their toll. His heart's working overtime just to keep him conscious. Caleb wiggled in Grace's arms, his small voice cutting through the adult tension like a blade. "The doggy sleeping, Mommy?" "The doggy's very sick, sweetheart," Grace managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "The doctor's trying to help him feel better." But even as she spoke the words, Grace felt a familiar dread settling in her chest. The same crushing helplessness she'd experienced during those terrible hours after the chaplain's visit, when she'd realized that all her love and prayers couldn't bring Tommy back from Afghanistan. She couldn't lose someone else. Not now. Not when. She'd finally understood the miracle that had brought Sergeant into their lives. The clinic door chimed again, and this time the arrival sent shock waves through the assembled crowd. 2 uniformed officials entered, a Memphis animal control officer and a representative from the local Department of Veterans Affairs. Their presence transformed the medical emergency into something more complicated, more bureaucratic, more threatening. "Ma'am," the animal control officer said, his voice professionally neutral, but his eyes lacking warmth. "We've received reports about an unregistered military working dog being held without proper authorization. We're going to need to take custody of the animal pending an investigation." Grace felt her world tilt sideways. "Take custody? He's dying." "Military working dogs are federal property," the VA representative added, his clipboard and official bearing creating an invisible barrier between humane compassion and institutional procedure. "There are protocols for handling separated canine units. This animal needs to be returned to military control for proper disposition." The word disposition hung in the air like a death sentence. Grace had heard enough military euphemisms during Tommy's service talk know that when bureaucrats talked about disposition of military animals, they usually meant euthanasia. Frank Murphy stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of 7 decades and a chest full of medals earned in places most people couldn't pronounce. "Now you listen here, son. That dog's been waiting 3 days. For this family. He's earned the right to choose where he dies." "Sir, I appreciate your sentiment," the animal control officer replied. "But we have regulations." "Regulations?" Dr. Hayes looked up from Sergeant's 4-line, his eyes blazing with an anger Grace had never seen in the gentle veterinarian. "This dog is in critical condition. Moving him now could kill him. Is that what your regulations recommend?" The bureaucratic standoff was interrupted by an unexpected voice from the crowd. The businessman in the expensive suit, the same man who'd complained about public disturbances here, stepped forward with his phone in his hand. "I've been recording this entire situation," he announced, his voice carrying a gravity that surprised everyone. and I've just posted it to my LinkedIn account, which has 40,000 followers. The story is already being shared by military families across the country." Grace stared at him in amazement. The man she'd dismissed as a heartless urban professional had been documenting Sergeant's story, turning their privateer into a public cause. Furthermore, the businessman continued, pulling out a business card with practiced efficiency. "I'm Richard Sterling, partner at Sterling Waite Associates. We specialize in military family law, and this woman has every right to care for this animal under the Military Family Pet Protection Act." The animal control officer's confidence wavered slightly. "I'm not familiar with that statute." "Then perhaps you should familiarize yourself before attempting to seize federal property that's been voluntarily relinquished to a Gold Star family." Richard Sterling shot back his corporate liar instincts fully engaged. Grace watched this unexpected alliance forming around her. Frank Murphy's moral authority, Dr. Hayes' medical expertise, Richard Sterling's legal knowledge, all rallying to protect a dog who'd become the symbol of something larger than any individual story. But the VA representative wasn't backing down. Military working dogs require specialized care and handling. Civilian facilities aren't equipped. This civilian facility, Dr. Hayes interrupted his voice, dangerous quiet. Treated military working dogs during Vietnam when the Army didn't have adequate veterinary support in country. "I've got more experience with war trauma in animals than most military vets have, Miaj." The young woman who'd been live streaming stepped forward, her phone still recording, but her demeanor completely changed from her earlier social media performance. "I've been broadcasting this story to 30,000 followers," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "The comments are pouring in from military families, veterans groups, animal rights organizations. Everyone's asking the same question. Why is the government trying to separate a war hero from the family he died trying to find?" Caleb chose that moment to break free from Grace's arms, his small legs carrying him directly to Sergeant's side, despite the crowd of adults arguing around the examination table. He placed his tiny hand on the dog's massive head and whispered, something too quiet for the adults to hear. Sergeant's eyes opened. The effect was electric. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Even the bureaucrats fell silent as they watched a 2-year-old child accomplish what medical intervention hadn't, bringing a dying dog back from the edge of unconsciousness through nothing more than pure, innocent love. "Please don't take Daddy's doggy away," Caleb said, his words clear and direct, addressed to the unformed officials with the fearless honesty that only children possess. The animal control officer's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Grace could see him struggling between institutional duty and human emotion, between following protocols and doing what was obviously right. The VA representative was made of sterner stuff. Emotional appeals don't change illegal realities. This animal belongs to the United States Army. It needs to be returned to proper military custody. For what? Grace's voice cut through his bureaucratic language like a scream. For euthanasia? For being warehoused in some military kennel until he dies of a broken heart. This dog spent 3 years searching for my family. He's found us. His mission is complete. Dr. Hayes looked up from monitoring Sergeant's vital signs. His expression grim, heart rate stabilizing, but barely. This dog's been running on pure determination. Now that he's found what he was looking for, his body's starting to shut down. Stress him with transport or separation and you'll kill him. The clinic fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor attached to Sergeant's chest. Everyone present understood they were witnessing a moment that would define not just the fate of one dog, but the meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and love in a world that had grown too comfortable with bureaucratic indifference. Frank Murphy broke The silence with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough wars to understand what truly mattered. Sometimes, he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Regulations need to step aside for what's right. This dog's completed his mission. Let him rest with his family. The crowd murmured agreement, but Grace knew their decision lay with the officials who had the power to tear apart the miracle that David Martinez and Sargent had spent 3 years creating. The ticking clock that had brought them to this moment was still running, but now it counted down to a different kind of deadline. The moment when bureaucracy would either honor love or destroy it. Sargent's eyes remained fixed on Caleb's face, as if the child's presence was the only thing keeping him tethered to life. The tension in Dr. Hayes' clinic reached a breaking point as the VA representative pulled out his phone, clearly preparing to call for backup to enforce the military's claim on Sargent. Grace felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. The Sam helplessness she'd experienced when the Army had taken Tommy away from her forever, when institutions had proved more powerful than love. But before the official could complete his call, the clinic door burst open with such force that the bell above it shattered against the frame. A figure in a wheelchair rolled through the entrance, propelled by arms that moved with military precision despite their obvious tremor. "Stand down, soldier," the newcomer commanded, his voice carrying an authority that made every person in Fairham snap to attention. "Nobody's taking that dog anywhere." Grace stared in shock at the man who just transformed their crisis into something entirely different. He was perhaps 60 years old, his legs obviously paralyzed, but his upper body radiating the kind of strength that came from refusing to surrender to circumstance. Military tattoos covered his arms, and his wheelchair bore decorations that spoke of service and multiple conflicts. Frank Murphy was the first to recover his voice. "Colonel Patterson, what in Sam Hill are you doing here?" "Saw the live stream," Colonel Patterson replied, maneuvering his wheelchair directly between the officials and Sargent's examination table. "Drove here from Little Rock fast as these wheels could carry me. That dog there saved my son's life in Afghanistan." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Grace felt her knees weaken as another piece of Tommy's story fell into place. Another connection in the web of sacrifice and brotherhood that had brought Sargent to their doorstep. "Your son?" Dr. Hayes asked, his hands never stopping their work on Sargent's IV line. "Lieutenant Michael Patterson, 47th Infantry," the colonel said, his voice thick with pride and pain. "Kier, March 15th, 2021. Same mission that took your husband." "Ma'am." He nodded respectfully toward Grace. "Sargent and his handler pulled my boy out of a burning Humvee, gave him 3 more hours of life, long enough to record a final message for his family." The date burned into Grace's consciousness like acid. March 15th, 2021, the day Tommy died. The mission David Martinez had described in his letter, where Tommy drew enemy fire to protect the dog team clearing the IED field. Her husband and Lieutenant Patterson's son had died together, saved by the same dog who now lay fighting for life on Dr. Hayes' table. The VA representative's official composer was cracking under the weight of military hierarchy. "Sir, with all due respect, military working dogs are a federal property regardless of their service record." "Federal property?" Colonel Patterson's voice could have cut glass. "Son, I've been dealing with military property for 30 years. This dog completed his final mission, his handler's dead. His service record shows 3 years AWOL, which in civilian terms means he's been honorably discharged through abandonment of duty." Richard Sterling stepped forward, his legal mind sizing on the colonel's words. Abandonment of duty creates a legal precedent for civilian custody, especially when the animal has been voluntarily placed with a military family. Voluntarily placed. The animal control officer was struggling to keep up with the rapidly shifting LegalLandscape. Grace found her voice strengthened by the presence of another military family who understood loss. David Martinez, Sergeant's handler, spent 2 years training him to find my family. He left written instructions. She held up the letter that had explained everything. This is a legal transfer of custody from a dying soldier to his battle buddies. Widow. Colonel Patterson nodded approvingly. Martinez was a good soldier. Lost both parents young. Treated his dog like family. If he wanted Sergeant to protect Thompson's family, then that's a direct order from a superior NCO to his canine partner. The young woman who'd been live streaming looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with amazement. The comments are insane. Military. Families from all over the country are sharing their own stories about Sergeant. Apparently, he's famous in veteran circles. There are dozens of soldiers posting about how he saved their lives. Dr. Hayes glanced up from his patient, his expression grave but hopeful, heart rate stabilizing, but he's still critical. All this stress and excitement isn't helping his recovery. Caleb remained oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him, his small hand stroking Sergeant's ears with unconscious tenderness. "Wake up, doggy," he whispered. "Mommy says we can. Go home now." The word home triggered something profound in Sergeant's consciousness. His eyes opened slowly, focusing first on Caleb's face, then moving to Grace with an expression of such intelligence and relief that it took her breath away. He's responding to the child. Dr. Hayes marveled. His vital signs improve every time the boy touches him. It's like the kid's voice is keeping him anchored to life. Frank Murphy wiped his eyes with the back of his weathered hand. Dogs know, son. They always know who's familiar and who ain't. But the bureaucratic battle wasn't over. The VERA representative made one final attempt to assert institutional authority. Regulations clearly state that military working dogs must be evaluated by qualified personnel before civilian placement. This animal could have behavioral issues, PTSD, aggression problems. Colonel Patterson-Law was bitter but amused. Sergeant's been evaluated by the most qualified personnel in existence, a 2-year-old child who recognizes a protector when he sees one.